Hey guys, we've got another special review for you today on All Hallows Eve. Today I'm going to be talking about the first Underworld movie, the beginning of a franchise that's one of the most well-known and dynamic franchises involving werewolves and vampires. Underworld definitely has presented a unique story, and I believe a very much needed change to stories involving werewolves and vampires in comparison to nearly all film, TV shows, books, and other mediums. Unfortunately, there are issues with the movie and the franchise itself, some of which I will cover in this video. Still, this is one of the best movies in werewolf and vampire fiction, in my opinion, as I will get into here soon. I will say Underworld has helped shape some of my opinions and perceptions for how werewolves and vampires should be written, though with obvious differences. Nevertheless, let's begin. Underworld tells the story of a secret war between two immortal species that have been in conflict for centuries. The war has continued to the modern day, where we find the lead character, Selene, a centuries-old death dealer and vampire continuing her own personal war on the lichen species. As the movie continues, she learns cruel truths about the war and her own origins as she meets a unique human, Michael, who has drawn the eyes of the lichens and their leader, Lucian. Upon first watching the movie, we see matters from the perspective of Selene and other like-minded vampires, believing they're waging a righteous war on a savage race. Of course, we learn in time this isn't true. Far from it. We realize lichens are the victims of a literal holocaust that had been murdering them for centuries, and they were just trying to defend themselves and avenge their fallen, all because of the prejudice and cruelty of certain vampires. Unfortunately, matters aren't resolved as one would hope, given what chronologically follows this film. Unlike with my Dog Soldiers review, I will discuss some of the elements of the movie that I feel weren't that great or questionable to start off with. To begin, why do vampires need flashlights? Seriously, the movie showed more than once that these vampires needed light to see within darkness. The species that literally can't go out in daylight needs light to see within darkened spaces. When the one lichen is attempting a sneak attack from the darkness on Khan and two death dealers, they should have immediately seen him. Anyone else find that's a serious issue with the writing and presentation of the species? Not to mention their healing factor wasn't that impressive. After Lucian stabbed Selene in the movie, she passed out in the car from the blood loss. You'd think a vampire would be able to quickly regenerate from a wound like that, especially since it wasn't from a weapon that didn't target her race's vulnerability. Unfortunately, the vampires aren't the only ones with some questionable writing moments. The lichens at times were shown to have their moments of less than impressive moments. They were shown multiple times crawling on the walls at a snail's pace. Selene once had to shoot through one of the floors of a building to escape them. She could have just shot them all down with how long it took her to do that since they didn't clear the distance. They weren't nearly as fast as one would think. I mean, werewolves you'd think would be faster than vampires in their wolf forms. Like how Reyes couldn't catch Selene, though that was in part because of the silver blades that were embedded in his body. Though the lichens and vampires both at times seemed to lack in speed, it seemed. Though it was inconsistent given how Lucian caught up to a speeding car in human form. You'd also think the eyes of both species would glow in the dark, given the obvious nocturnal animalistic heritage with the animals that bit the progenitors of both species. The sound effects for the lichens and their wolf forms was a bit of a mixed bag. The big cat snarls and roars. I think were great, to be honest, though some of the screeching and screaming I'm not the biggest fan of. I would have added more canid growls and snarls, maybe some big cat or bear noises to fill in the other sounds. Perhaps this is a nitpick, it's just some of the sound effects aren't as fitting or impressive in my opinion. To another element that I'm a bit uncertain about was Michael's hybrid design in this movie. It was a little better with some of the shots of it in the second film. This first film, it was still kind of lackluster, given that his hybrid form was actually more human than one would expect. Given he's a lichen-dominant hybrid, you'd think there'd be more wolfish design to the head, like a longer snout and more prominent pointed ears. Not sure how I feel about the pure black eyes either. Though the more sorta animalistic build, fangs, and claws I think were done fairly well, though he wasn't as muscular as one would believe. Like this kinda goes with the look of the lichens in their wolf forms. I feel that there's both some really good elements to their design and others that could have used some work. The lichens having a muscular build and a sorta towering form was a good design choice, though this was inconsistent in the later films. Them having little fur wasn't that great, though this was fixed in Rise of the Lichens. The short snouts comparatively aren't the best touch, though it's not too serious of an issue. The later films appeared inconsistent at times with the shaping of their heads, though that could be my eyes playing tricks on me. The snouts are more like certain dog breeds rather than those of wolves. I believe werewolves in their wolf form, if they're to have a humanoid form, should look like this, though obviously the lichens' wolf forms are far from the worst, thankfully. One foundational part of the nature of the immortal species is them being biologically immortal transgenics, rather than them being magical beings. This is something I'm a bit on the fence about. The actor who played Brace took part in co-creating the franchise and decided he wanted to go a more scientific route rather than supernatural. Now, how he and the others designed this, I believe works the way they wanted it to. I'm honestly more fond of the magical origin and nature myself rather than the scientific approach, though. This did, however, not make the vampires undead, which I think was a plus. Not particularly fond of the undead nature for the species. In more recent years, it hasn't made sense to me. Certain weaknesses and vulnerabilities of vampires in a lot of stories don't make sense to me either. This is reflected in part because of arguable human prejudices and racial religious propaganda. Shifting to another point, the Lycans being immortal was also a plus, as werewolf lore in our world is so ancient and mysterious that there's some possible descriptions of them as being immortal like vampires, in stark contrast to a lot of werewolf fiction, though it's difficult to say given the lore is so old and some stories have been possibly lost to time. I can't say for certain to be clear. Given the mystery, it's understandable why there's different interpretations to it, resulting in different versions of them in fiction, even though most of them are the same or similar just with different brandings. I'm also a bit torn on the battles involving the Lycans and vampires in the movie mostly being gunfights. Granted, this wasn't part because of the budget, I imagine, as the Lycans were made with practical effects and some CGI while making this film. Within the story itself, I can see why it was written this way. Given the Lycans had acquired ammunition that could quickly kill vampires was a highly effective weapon that could be used more liberally than using their own claws and fangs. This isn't to say this also didn't happen, where we did see that the Lycans normally overpower their vampire enemies in close combat. Which was the right move. No disrespect to vampires though, it's just they're not as physically as powerful as their targets, or most aren't. I guess when people think of a battle between a werewolf and vampire, one doesn't think of them using guns to kill each other, though a werewolf would, you'd think, normally slaughter a vampire in close combat. A vampire could win, you just have to write it correctly and convincingly. Some haven't done that though.
I should warn you. I've feared.
Though ironically, there's a moment where a vampire who should have done more damage was overwhelmed easier than one would expect. Emilia, one of the three elders, is assassinated by a small group of Lycans to obtain her blood and in another centuries-old enemy to their people. Given she's an elder, you'd think she would have done some damage rather than being killed without much of a fight. While she wouldn't be as strong as Victor, her being an elder would grant her greater than normal vampire prowess. Despite her not being armored or armed, we've seen what a vampire elder can do to a Lycan. Sadly so.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Though speaking of such, this film and its franchise has one of the best and most hateable villains I've ever seen in a movie. Victor, the vampire elder, is
one big pile of shit.
To put it bluntly, there's so much that he's done throughout his centuries-long life that mark him as a vile person. His most well-known acts are, of course, the enslavement then genocide of the Lycans, the murder of his daughter by having her burnt alive by sunlight for loving Lucian, the brainwashing of Selene and other vampires into believing the Lycans were responsible for the war, and the slaying of Selene's family. What he made Lucian do to his kin will be covered in a future video about Rise of the Lycans, perhaps some character analysis videos. He and Craven are all too similar for their arrogance, cruelty, and prejudice. The cruel system he built claimed who knows how many lives, Lycan, vampire, and/or human. It was also about power and control for him. He claimed he was to protect the vampire species, but we know that's bullshit. He was more than willing to berate, beat, and butcher any vampire that didn't fit into his perfect little world. Credit to the actor for doing such an outstanding job bringing Victor to life. Moving on from Victor, though, I want to talk about Selene for a minute. As the lead character of the film and franchise, we're going to follow and see things from her perspective for the most part. Her human family was slaughtered, and she was lied to into believing the Lycans were responsible, and then brainwashed into believing they're monsters that had to be eliminated, not knowing that the one who saved her was the one responsible. Selene spent most of her life systematically attempting to wipe out a species that were simply defending themselves and trying to survive. There is no telling how many innocent people she murdered in the false belief she was avenging her family. Even if Lycans had killed her family, the ones who did the act rather than the species would have been responsible. Either way, it didn't justify genocide. Selene did have some growth to an extent when meeting Michael, given he saved her and she fell in love with a member of a species she spent centuries murdering. It was only because Craven revealed what happened, and Victor confirming it, that she realized the truth. She didn't really grapple with what she's done like you think she should have. I mean, seriously, you find out you helped in the genocide of a people over a lie, and even if it was true, it didn't justify what was done.
Don't you know what I've done? Yes!
Given how so much of werewolf and vampire fiction is about seeking the genocide of either or both species, I think Underworld did it a little better than those, though there was certainly more room for more than what was given. Moving on to the more positive and better elements of the movie, there's some interesting stuff to discuss. I think I'll start off with the presentation of the werewolf transformation Underworld designed. Other than the change, as it was called, for younger Lycans, I was impressed with how it was shown. For older Lycans, the quick shift from human to wolf was swift and wasn't nearly as painful as most other werewolf transformations. I'm not a fan of the slow, agonizing change from human to wolf a lot of werewolf fiction goes with in their creations. Unfortunately, it was revealed young Lycans did experience the painful transformation, and that it takes time to be able to shift at will, which I can understand though. Ray's change represents one of the best for the pure physical transformations of a werewolf that's been shown, and to my knowledge, it wouldn't be my top pick for what a werewolf transformation should be at its best. That would be something more like the transformation of the beast from the Teen Wolf show, with it being a swift mystical change. Even though the wolf form look is terrible, and so much of that show didn't do werewolves justice. But to switch back to Underworld, I'm glad they had both werewolves and vampires in at least a gray area rather than the whole bullshit vampire and werewolf evil that can't be shown any other way trope. We got to see both species as people whether just trying to live their lives or just trying to survive. The Lycans were trying to protect their own. Lucian's goal was to end the genocide of his people and to bring about peace between the species, which included ending the vampires responsible for the persecution of his people. We did see some of the Lycans being assholes. I won't deny that. I just want you to remember these are people who have been forced to live underground for centuries, surviving off scraps while being constantly hunted by specialized hunters, seeking to annihilate their race, and have to keep an eye, ear, and nose out for them every day and every night of their lives. The frustration, anger, fear, and depression would be off the charts. Hell, they sometimes entertain themselves by fighting each other to relieve stress. While Lucian did check them on this, trying to keep them in a more focused manner, you shouldn't deny that they were in a bad situation. They were enduring a holocaust that had lasted 600 years, and before that spent a couple hundred years as slaves. They were screwed over majorly. The film also did well with not presenting werewolves as kill everything in sight, along with not making them as weak as many other incarnations. Having the Lycans not being the typical werewolf that destroys everything that's in front of them gives them more depth. There are some folks who will give them a little depth by giving more to the werewolves than simply being fur-covered serial killers in the fiction they create. Not to mention both the Lycans and vampires, the ones that are protagonists, aren't the self-hating kinds of being that perceive humans as perfect and their own races as less than and just deserving to all die. We also are shown how powerful both the Lycans and vampires can be, though to varying degrees. This is in stark contrast to fiction, where we see werewolves and vampires getting outclassed by various beings, including by humans, whether in strength, speed, agility, durability, etc. We see Underworld give at least some of them respectable feats of power, where other fiction would undermine them in their presentation. Another key factor here is that silver actually didn't automatically mean a Lycan's death. On more than a few occasions, Lycans are peppered by silver weapons and survive, even recovering from them without a scratch, though this depends on the severity of the wounds. Even still, this is in stark difference from where even small bits of silver will instantly maim, if not kill, werewolves in other stories. This is another fairly well-created element that strengthens these werewolves. The opposite of such positive outlines for werewolves doesn't give any depth to these entities other than to serve the human ego, or use them as a punching bag, or treat them as a joke to buff up another entity. I mean, to those who go with that or push that bullshit,
you people have no imagination.
I mean, seriously, there's so many creations with werewolves and or vampires being so unimpressive, whether by their prowess, looks, or writing, that it's such a breath of fresh air when we get to see them written with some portion of respect. Underworld isn't perfect, granted, it's just certainly a lot better than a lot of the bullshit I've seen. Drawing from this, we have to talk about Lucian, my favorite character from this movie and franchise. When we first watch this movie, we see him as an antagonist, a villain that even Michael said was responsible for the war between the Lycans and vampires. This film partially built up his supposed savagery and his role in how the war started, and the bloodshed that followed. Yet we learn that he's a victim, alongside his race, of the evil by certain vampires led by Victor that subjected them to enslavement and then genocide. Lucian, like his brothers, was tired and hungry to end the war. Though in contrast to some of his men, we saw that he didn't lash out at those who didn't truly deserve it. Yes, he did bite Michael without his consent and ordered the capture of certain other humans to find a way to combine the bloodlines. I don't deny that. He is just responsible for the survival of his people and their well-being. His people are being wiped out and he's desperate to end the war and those responsible. He lost the love of his life centuries ago, and he lost who knows how many brothers and sisters following that fateful night. He spent 6 centuries trying to end the war and being unable to both kill that asshole Victor and end the conflict he started. Lucian revealed that he wanted peace between the species. He didn't want to wipe out the vampires like so many of them had done to his race. In contrast to certain characters who gladly wipe out the entire race of which certain members enacted such cruelty, Lucian wanted coexistence. He and Sonia loved one another. They were proof that both species could more than just tolerate one another. He presents a werewolf protagonist who, while we don't see him transform in the film, presents to be a formidable individual who shows immense resolve and grit to try to avenge the wrongs of the past and present to ensure the survival and freedom of his people. This is most apparent in arguably his lowest point, when he's able to endure the silver nitrate in his body through sheer force of will to protect Michael and to attempt to bring about peace. Sadly though, Lucian was wrong with his last words. His will wasn't done given what happened after. Still, I feel they paid more respect to werewolves through him than a lot of fiction has done with werewolves. I just don't know why he thought working with Craven was a good idea, especially near the end. Underworld, at least thankfully, has some unique depth to its story and its world building. It gives it an incarnation to the werewolf and vampire genre that few stories even try to delve into. While some of the other films in the franchise sometimes fall short in their stories and what they execute in their plots, I feel the first Underworld movie and its prequels stand as the best of its franchise, along with leading werewolf and vampire fiction in general in terms of quality. Despite my admittedly bias for the magical versions of both species, I feel that this movie did create a fairly complex and thought-out design of these races. Granted, I used to be into the werewolf versus vampire trope years back. Now I'm not nearly as fond, but something to be brought up in other videos, including future videos about the Underworld franchise. We got to see a story involving werewolves and vampires without humans in the way, given those stories make it all about the humans in one way or another and shitting on the werewolves and vampires most often. Seeing them as people and their story isn't marred by humanocentric crap. Coming back to watching the movie after knowing the story, you wish, or some of us at least, that there was peace and there could have been coexistence between the species and all of this bloodshed could have been ended or avoided if those like Victor had been ended. Sadly, Lucian's vision wasn't achieved like he hoped. Nevertheless, I want to hear what you all think. What are your thoughts and feelings about the first Underworld movie? I hope you all enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And remember, happy Halloween.